us to put on our imagination hats for the first part of this tour, because I'm going to get us to cast our minds back to around about the 1600s. And that is when the Pacifica people would have been coming across to discover Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now the people that would have landed first, they would have obviously been on the outskirts of New Zealand. Particularly the people we're talking about would have come from the Coromandel. Now when they came into the Hauraki Gulf to discover Tamaki Makaurau or Auckland, they would have come across all of these little islands dotted in the Hauraki Gulf. Now of course what they were looking for is to break up their iwi to little land sanctuaries for them to start land settlement and to live on. When they came here specifically, they first found Kornoi Island and Waiheke. These two little islands here were more used as kai moana or kai gathering spots because we did not have any potable water source. So they based themselves on Kornoi and Waiheke, and then obviously they went into Tamaki Makaurau as well. But those two were their settlement areas. So what they would have done is they would have come in here, they would have stopped possibly at Men's Bay, one of our larger beaches, to be able to beach their waka, or into Home Bay here. They would have come ashore, and this would have been a dense lowland coastal forest. So if you can imagine walking through a huge forest, that's exactly what this place would have looked like. They would have gathered either kai moana from the ocean, as you can imagine back then would have been bountiful, plenty of food to feed everybody, and they would have been collecting flora and fauna from the island. So we would have had a lot of pahurakawa, we would have had a lot of harakeke, mahui, kai kokomako here on the island. So a lot of that would have been used for their voyages, either back to their homes or out when they're going back to the Coromandel on their voyages. We have got 2 pah sites and 2 mitten sites here in the island. They use their pah sites to keep an eye on who was around them at the time while they were here on the island, which would have been no more than a couple of days at a time. And that is up at North Tower, where we end our tour today, and out at the very south end of the island by our sculpture. Obviously 2 great vantage points to be able to 360 degree see the whole entire island. And the 2 midden sites that we have is one out at Mai Bay on the corner of the cliff face. If you do a coastal walk today, you actually see the beautiful shell bank that's there, and the midden site that's in the shell bank. And the other is over by Ladies Bay. Not necessarily a walk you probably get to, but it is there. The stories that we give to you guys today, and that all of this knowledge comes from our tikanga waiwai, not our mana whenua, but our tikanga waiwai, which is Ngāti Pāwa. They are based majority on Waiheke, but they are throughout Tamaki Makaurau especially. And they bless us with these stories to be able to share with you about what they used this land for, and also to be able to tell you stories about our endangered bird species that are their tonga. Now we're going to move through to some European settlement times. So the first European settlement that happened here on the island was around about the 1800s, the very early 1800s. And that was by a man called James Heard. He was voyaging around New Zealand doing land acquisition for the Crown. When he came across Rotorua Island, he decided that this was a perfect spot to create a little family homestead for his family that they could live on self-sufficiently. They obviously were collecting rainwater for drinking and for washing, and that he could carry on doing his work for the Crown doing land acquisition. So James managed to find the chief of Ngāti Pāwa and buy the island from him. Of course, it's the classic New Zealand land settlement. It was a couple of blankets, some sheep, some guns, gunpowder, and there was a little bit of monetary value that was exchanged as well. A few years later, when everything became a legal process for land acquisition, it was found that James and Ngāti Pāwa had not done the transaction legally, so therefore it was then processed through the courts of the change of ownership of the island, and we have got that original deed in our museum that is displayed for everyone to view. James's family lived here for around about 25 years while he voyaged around. Came to the end of his time. The main reason why it came to an end was because he lost all 50 of his crew. So he decided that obviously being down here in New Zealand wasn't working for him, and that it was time to pack up and go home. So he sold the island on to our pioneering family, which is the Ruthie family, and that was around about 1850s. Now they were called the Ruthie family, and the Ruthie family had a great vision for this island. It was to turn it into a holistic camping retreat. Now, back in those days, we had just set up our railway network throughout New Zealand, and the big thing for a family holiday was to jump on the train, head down to Wellington or somewhere intercity, and go and enjoy a family holiday on the railway. Not to get on a steamboat and come out to an island. So it was a huge vision that they had, and they did a fantastic job at marketing themselves and getting people through these doors, that they ended up having about 200 people a day or every other day brought on a steamship to the island. And of course back in those days it would have been huge families. It would have been mum, dad, the kids, aunties, uncles, grandparents, and they would have had the huge heavy canvas tents that they would have brought with them, and they would have stayed here for about 10 days at a time. And they would have set up all over the island. But a part of that holistic well-being was that the Ruthie family had planted a vegetable garden and a fruit orchard. And a part of your family holiday was that you would be able to forage from those areas and live off the land. You would have gone fishing for your sustenance. You would have brought things with you, of course, but to maintain that lifestyle and live outdoors and have what we would call a Kiwi holiday these days was a whole new dynamic and a whole new aspect to what we would call a holiday. What are you seeing?
2 pairs of white-faced herons there.
Oh, yes.
Coming.
Who?
A pair.
A pair.
Sorry, I got excited.
So yes, that was the Ruthie family, and they were very successful here on the island. Now we're going to move into the 1900s. Now, does anyone know what the Drunkards and Inebriates Act was? So that was 1906 when that was initiated by the government, and what that would have meant for us Kiwis, us adults specifically, 6 o'clock closing, all the bars, all the restaurants, done. If you were caught on the street walking home after having a few beers, you were arrested and sent to prison. No qualms, nothing about it. You were committing an offence. You've also got to remember the First World War was just coming to an end, and some of our returned servicemen and women had become addicted to opiate substances from being overseas as a coping mechanism for the emotional turmoil that they were going through from what they had witnessed. Of course, they would have got caught up in that as well. If we can imagine something like back in Auckland, Mount Eden prison would have been a lot smaller capacity than what it is today. But if we all got caught intoxicated or under the influence, we were all being put into a jail cell. And so by a couple of months after this act was passed, places like Mount Eden were heaving with people with just either an addiction problem or an enjoyment of alcohol as a relief after a hard day's work. And New Zealand had no way to deal with people that had these problems. Prison was the only option. So the government initiated a conversation with the Salvation Army, and they were fresh to New Zealand. They had just come from the UK, and they had a huge reputation back in the UK for helping rehabilitate people. And so they wanted to set up some kind of treatment centre, some kind of program that could help these people instead of cluttering up our prison systems. And the Salvation Army, of course, being for the people, they said, of course, we would love to help and set up a program or a treatment centre. So they got underway. The island that they purchased to start this treatment centre was Pakatoa Island, which is on the northern end of us. When we get to the top, you'll be able to see the island itself. They built a small 40-bed dormitory treatment centre. Within 8 months of opening up their doors, they were at capacity and still being brought people every single day. So the Salvation Army knew that they needed to increase their capacity size to be able to treat all the influx of people that were coming. So initially, the Salvation Army came to Rotorua Island and had a discussion with the Ruthie family about leasing the northern end of the island just as an overflow to try and keep these people coming through the doors and receiving their treatment. The Ruthie family actually were very humble and decided that, you know what, after about 40 years of running their outdoor holistic camping retreats, that their time had come and this calling was a lot bigger than what they had done here on the island, and it was a much needed resource that was needed here in New Zealand. So they willingly sold the whole entire island to the Salvation Army, and they ran a 2-program stage. So they divided men and women up. So women went to Pakatoa and men came here to Rotorua. They barged over old disused railway buildings from around New Zealand, and they also built a 2-story Victorian villa just up on the terraces behind us. Now that Victorian villa had dormitories up the top, laundry, all sorts of amenities for the clients to use whilst they were here. But down the bottom they had everything that you could possibly need to help restore a person completely. So they had a dentist, they had doctor's offices, they had psychologists, they had pharmacists, you name it. They restored the person 100% as best they could before they had finished their treatment, so that when they went back into their communities, they could put their best foot forward. How those people got here would have been just like you guys today, just like the people before them. They came here by boat. So they would have come up, just as these people are now, disembarking their boat. They would have come up the wharf, which was, the original wharf was just here. You can see the remnant concrete blocks. And in the early 1900s, this part of the wharf road was not built. This was just a coastal cliff. And there was a little bridge that would have come across, and you would have walked this avenue of Norfolk pine trees behind you. So these Norfolk pine trees are over 100 years old. The Salvation Army ran their treatment centre here for 108 years, and 12,500 New Zealanders walked this avenue. This was the entrance to the island. These trees have got a specific resemblance for the Salvation Army. They were planted specifically to represent the 12-step program that they would have gone through for their detox, which is now the 12-step bridge program. So it was a physical pillar for each person to look at and see, you know, we can stand strong and we can be together, and that when we get to the end, it'll make a lot more sense. We've got a light at the end of the tunnel. So as we leave this area today, guys, we're going to walk up the ramp, and on the ramp you'll notice each one has got the number written on it. When you get to about number 8, I think it is, off the top of my head, you'll see the full 12-step program. We'll just stop there quickly to have a quick look, and then we'll end up underneath the visitor centre top alcove, and we'll stop there for a quick chat too. Alright, let's get walking.